Nick Sterling had always prided himself on his method acting. After 30 years in Hollywood, he'd developed a reputation for taking roles that bordered on the bizarre, from playing identical quintuplets in 5 Times the Trouble to portraying a man who believed he could communicate with prehistoric fossils in Jurassic Whispers. But nothing could have prepared him for the strangest role of his career, himself. It began on a Tuesday morning in June, when his agent, Melissa Chen, called with what she described as the role of a lifetime. Nick was lounging by his infinity pool, feeding organic lettuce to Herbert, his pet tortoise, while contemplating whether to add another replica medieval castle to his backyard collection. "Listen, Nick," Melissa said, her voice crackling with excitement. "I've got this brilliant director, Xavier Thompson. He's got this vision, says it's going to revolutionize cinema. He wants you for the lead." Nick absent-mindedly stroked Herbert's shell. "What's the catch? Am I playing a time-traveling Shakespeare? A cowboy astronaut? A man who marries his own reflection?" "Better," Melissa replied. "He wants you to play yourself." Nick snorted. "Myself? That's hardly acting. Where's the challenge in that?" "That's the beauty of it. Just be yourself for 3 months. No script, no direction, just pure, unfiltered Nick Sterling. Xavier says he'll follow you with a small crew. Very minimalist, very artistic. The contract's generous, 7 figures." Nick was about to refuse when Herbert slowly munched on a particularly crispy piece of lettuce, fixing him with what seemed like a knowing stare. Nick had always trusted Herbert's judgment. The tortoise had correctly predicted his last 3 Academy Award nominations by choosing between different types of vegetables. "Fine," Nick sighed. But only because Herbert seems to approve. What Nick didn't know was that Xavier Thompson wasn't just any director. He was a former quantum physicist who had developed a revolutionary theory about reality TV, specifically, that reality itself could be manipulated through careful observation, like some massive quantum experiment. Nick Sterling wasn't just going to star in a movie, he was about to become the unwitting subject of the world's first quantum documentary. The filming began the next day. True to Melissa's word, the crew was minimal, just Xavier and 2 camera operators who seemed to materialize out of thin air whenever Nick did anything remotely interesting. At first, Nick tried to perform being himself, but Xavier's only direction was maddeningly simple: just be natural. So Nick did what came naturally. He spent 3 hours arguing with his collection of antique weather vanes about the true meaning of North. He commissioned a local artist to paint a portrait of Herbert the tortoise in the style of every major art movement from the Renaissance to postmodern. He started taking tango lessons from a former circus clown who claimed to have taught dance to penguins in Antarctica. And somewhere along the way, something strange began to happen. The more Nick tried to just be himself, the more his reality began to bend. His mansion's corridors seemed to rearrange themselves when he wasn't looking. His collection of rare Mesopotamian wind chimes started playing themselves at midnight. And Herbert, his faithful tortoise companion, appeared to be aging backward. What Nick didn't realize was that this was just the beginning. As Xavier's cameras continued to roll, the line between performance and reality would blur until even Nick wouldn't be able to tell where the movie ended and his life began. But that was still to come, and for now, Nick Sterling was simply enjoying the strangest role of his career, himself. Little did he know that the quantum documentary was already working its magic, and reality itself was about to get a lot more flexible. By the 2nd month of filming, Nick Sterling's life had taken several unexpected turns. His morning routine now included consulting Herbert the tortoise about his daily schedule, which had become surprisingly accurate ever since the reptile started arranging Nick's appointment calendar using lettuce leaves. The camera crew, still eerily silent, had developed an uncanny ability to predict where Nick would be before he even knew himself. One particularly memorable Tuesday, Nick woke to find his entire collection of rare Byzantine coins had transformed into chocolate doubloons. He blamed this on the previous night's wine tasting session with his newly hired sommelier, a retired sword swallower who insisted on serving each vintage while hanging upside down from Nick's chandelier. But when he bit into one of the coins and tasted genuine 6th century Constantinople, he began to suspect something stranger was afoot. Melissa, he called his agent, pacing his marble-floored study while examining a chocolate coin that somehow held the patina of 1,500 years of history. I think we need to talk about Xavier. Oh, darling, isn't he brilliant? Melissa gushed through the speakerphone. The dailies are absolutely magnificent. The critics who've seen early footage are calling it transcendental cinema. Someone even used the phrase quantum leap in documentary filmmaking, though I think they were being a bit on the nose. That's not. Nick started, then paused as he watched Herbert slowly crawl across his desk and arrange today's morning paper into an origami swan. That's not what I mean. Strange things are happening. My reality is shifting. That's called acting, sweetie. You're just really in the zone. No, you don't understand. Yesterday, I found myself giving an impromptu lecture on theoretical physics to my collection of Victorian music boxes. And they were taking notes, Melissa. Taking notes. Perfect. That's exactly the kind of quirky charm we're going for. Nick ran his fingers through his hair in frustration. And Xavier, have you noticed how he never seems to eat or sleep? How he sometimes flickers like a bad television signal. Yesterday, I could have sworn I saw him in two places at once. Method directors, darling. They're all a bit eccentric. Remember that one who insisted on communicating only through interpretive dance? But Nick wasn't convinced. He decided to do some investigating of his own. Late that night, after the camera crew had seemingly departed, though he could never be entirely sure these days, he snuck into Xavier's production office in the guest house. What he found made his blood run cold. The walls were covered in complex mathematical equations that seemed to twist and move when he wasn't looking directly at them. On a central monitor, dozens of video feeds showed different versions of himself going about various activities, some familiar, some he had no memory of ever doing. In one, he was teaching calculus to a group of attentive flamingos in his pool. In another, he appeared to be staging a one-man production of War and Peace for an audience of his sentient weather vanes. But it was the document on Xavier's desk that really caught his attention. It was a scientific paper titled The Sterling Experiment, Quantum Observation and the Collapse of Celebrity Reality. The author's name was listed as Dr. Xavier Thompson, Ph.D., Department of Quantum Reality Engineering, Universe B351. Nick's hands trembled as he picked up the paper. According to the abstract, he wasn't just starring in a documentary, he was the subject of an interdimensional experiment in reality manipulation. Xavier wasn't just a director, he was a scientist from another universe, using the act of documentary filmmaking to alter the very fabric of Nick's reality. As this realization sank in, Nick heard a familiar voice behind him. Fascinating reading, isn't it? He turned to find Xavier standing in the doorway, his form flickering slightly at the edges. But before Nick could respond, Herbert the tortoise came racing into the room. Since when could Herbert race, with an urgent message spelled out in lettuce leaves on his shell, reality breach imminent. And that's when things got really weird. The reality breach turned out to be more spectacular than Nick could have imagined. As Xavier flickered before him, the walls of the guest house began to ripple like water, and through their dissolving surface, Nick caught glimpses of other realities, countless versions of himself living out different lives, some familiar, others wildly divergent. Don't panic, Xavier said, his form now switching rapidly between different versions of himself, sometimes younger, sometimes older, sometimes wearing a lab coat, sometimes dressed as a 17th century pirate. This is all perfectly normal quantum behavior. Normal? Nick's voice cracked. My chandelier sommelier just merged with my collection of rare Mongolian throat-singing records to create some kind of musical hybrid entity. Herbert is speaking in iambic pentameter. And I'm pretty sure my left shoe just time-traveled to ancient Egypt. Ah, yes, Xavier nodded, consulting a device that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a Victorian pocket watch. The quantum entanglement is spreading faster than anticipated. You see, Mr. Sterling, when we began filming you, we created what we call a celebrity observation field, a quantum bubble where reality becomes particularly malleable due to the focused attention of documentary filmmaking. But why me? Nick demanded, ducking as a flock of origami cranes made from his screenplay collection flew past, reciting dialogue from his old movies in perfect harmony. Because you, Nick Sterling, have the most quantum unstable personality in all the multiverse, Xavier explained, his form finally settling on something between Albert Einstein and a young Bob Dylan. Your natural eccentricity creates micro-tears in the fabric of reality. We simply amplified the effect. Before Nick could process this, Herbert came skittering across the ceiling. Gravity had become more of a suggestion than a law at this point, his shell now displaying a real-time feed of quantum probability calculations. The convergence approaches, the tortoise announced in a voice that somehow combined Morgan Freeman's gravitas with Stephen Hawking's scientific authority. Nick watched in fascination and horror as various versions of his reality began to bleed into each other. His prized collection of historical teapots had merged with his vintage motorcycle collection, creating a gang of steam-powered vehicles that zoomed around his estate, serving Earl Grey to confused passers-by. His meditation room had somehow fused with his home theater, resulting in a space where Zen masters led mindfulness sessions while action movies played in 4D. "This is bad," Xavier muttered, frantically adjusting dials on his reality measuring device. "The quantum celebrity field is collapsing. Soon, all possible versions of Nick Sterling will converge into a single point of infinite improbability." "Is that as bad as it sounds?" Nick asked, watching as one version of himself from Universe C789 attempted to teach another version from Universe X42 how to juggle antimatter. "Worse," Xavier grimaced. "If we don't stabilize the field soon, your eccentric energy could tear a hole in the space-time continuum. The entire multiverse could become Sterlingified." Sterlingified? Every reality would become infused with your particular brand of chaos. Imagine a universe where everyone collects ancient weather vanes, where all problems are solved by consulting prophetic tortoises, where method acting becomes the dominant form of quantum physics. Nick was about to argue that this didn't sound entirely terrible when a new voice entered the conversation.